Today I am bringing you a Strand Warlock build that can really master every single debuff in the Strand kit. It has very high access to Suspend, it's got Threadlings left and right, Unravel all over the place, and Sever on top of it thanks to some artifact perk boost that we got in Act 2 of this episode. This is a very episodic based build because it's relying on a lot of artifact perks, but man is it strong, and we've still got several months of this episode, so why not take advantage? We're using Mataiodoxia, which will give us suspending melees and give us more melee energy on all of our suspended kills, and we're using Barrow Dyad with the Hatchling Catalyst and the Ambition Path so that it becomes much stronger and can generate more Threadlings. On top of that, Horde Shuttle Artifact perks and will generate a lot of Threadlings, and those Threadlings will sever, cutting enemy damage by 52% for this episode, and that just makes everything so much easier. This is solo gameplay here, but this has fantastic team support. See, we're just rolling through this Legend campaign mission. This is where I always test, and it is working very solidly, and you always have a great super to fall back on in Needlestorm, and it is, as always, very great. If that sounds good to you, let's get into it. I'm Engineer. Just to give you a review of the build, my goal with this was to master every Strand verb, but especially Suspend. A similar analog to this recently is the Arc Mega Blind build with Vesper of Radius, where it's just non-stop blind. We just want a lot of crowd control, and the main use here is for general support and ad heavy encounters. This is not really going to be great for boss encounters and raids or dungeons, but if you have someone with a lot of ads that you just want to keep controlled, or you're doing like Nightfalls, it's going to shine pretty well there. I've tested up to 15 power level under. In teams, I think you could push a little bit higher and definitely run it in GMs. So on the pro side, a lot of very hard crowd control. Suspend completely takes enemies and makes it so they can't do anything else. Great AoE damage over time, all the time. Pretty decent single target damage thanks to Barrow Dyad. That's really our only strong point for single target damage. And you're going to get a lot of Sever from Threadlings because we're churning out quite a bit of those. For the cons, it's extremely reliant on artifact perks. This build will not work like this in a few months unless Bungie buffs Strand, which I really hope they do. If you have really small or spread out groups, it's going to really slow it down. You won't really see it unless you have some clumps of pretty high ad density. But our newer battlegrounds and strikes tend to have a lot of ad density, so this isn't too bad. And then lastly, the Woven Mail uptime is rough. Strand Warlock just does not have great access to Woven Mail, and it shows here. It's just a fragment that gives us 5 seconds of Woven Mail, but the crowd control usually covers for it, and Sever is doing so much work to decrease the incoming damage, and that's pretty helpful. If you followed some of my recent videos, like my recent Strand Hunter build, then you might know that I'm usually pretty positive on Threadlings. A lot of people kind of put them down, but I think they're a little underrated. I still think they could use some definite buffs. They have some AI problems, and they just can't reach flying enemies, which to me seems insane to completely invalidate an entire facet of build crafting because of flying enemies. Main thing here is damage is 45% of a bolt charger ignition per Threadling. With Thread of Evolution, which is a Strand fragment, that damage becomes 60% of a bolt charger ignition, and then will move faster and further. So a Threadling grenade can spawn 3 Threadlings for 180% of ignition on just that one grenade. Hatchling will spawn a Threadling on any precision kill or every 3 kills. Thread of Rebirth spawns a Threadling every 3 Strand weapon kills, and Horde Shuttle creates them based on weapon damage to unraveled enemies, which we have up all the time. And then finally, Boosted Horde Shuttle will sever all enemies that Threadling hits for 10 seconds, which reduces their damage by 40% normally, but if you have the Disruptor Spike artifact perk, that boosts the damage reduction down to 52% less, so less than half of their normal damage, which is just incredible. You should, in challenging content right now, definitely be thinking about having someone making Threadlings because it's that helpful. The other main catalyst for this build is Barrow Dyad. This is the exotic quest weapon for this episode of Heresy, and it has extremely solid damage. I was pretty medium on this at first, but in Act 2 you can unlock the Path of Ambition, which makes it more of a single target focused weapon where it builds up blight faster on single targets and it does more damage to them. In general, you just want to shoot this at enemies and you'll build up your bar. You do a reload and it loads the blighted rounds and you just fire those off, and that's pretty much the whole loop. Crowd control is really helpful for this because it keeps enemies in place so you can really land those hits on them and build up those blighted charges and just make sure they hit because they can't dodge them while they're suspended. Now this is is a craftable exotic, and you can see exactly what I have crafted on mine over here. I have the Hatchling Catalyst, which I think is one of the better options because I think there's some disadvantages to the other ones, and we only have high impact reserves and Hatchling right now. So not a lot of options to pick from, but I actually think this is one of the better options overall. For other things you can pick, I really like Combat Grip because it takes the recoil direction to 100 and it's perfectly vertical, so it makes it really easy to land those crits easier. And then take Polygonal Rifling to get a little bit more stability. And then on the reload side, take Alloy Magazine because this was recently, it's a reload scaler, but it now works at all ranges and it scales from full magazine all the way down to an empty magazine with a stronger effect, which is really good. Now for other weapons, I recommend use a Strand Heavy because it just kind of synergizes with the build and can unravel. And then a Rolling Storm Psychopomp can also add in some Bolt Charge if you have the room for that. But if you run Nightfalls, you might be using that weapon slot for champion counters. So our exotic, as I mentioned earlier, is Mataiodoxia. This makes Arcane Needles become shield piercing, which is really helpful in those GM type activities. And then if you score an Arcane Needle hit on an enemy, it marks them, and then when they die, there's a Suspending Explosion. 2 Arcane Needles will make an even bigger explosion, and that is great. And the last part is whenever you get an Arcane Needle kill or suspended enemy kill, you will get melee energy back, which just helps keep the loop going and helps synergize everything. And that's why you really want to build into as much suspend as possible. Now, if you don't have this, it requires you to own the final shape, and the only place you can get it from is Rahul's Novel Decryption, which you can do after you reset his reputation one time within an episode or season. For our aspects and abilities, our first aspect is the Wanderer. This makes all tangles emit a suspending blast, and it also makes them not affected by gravity when thrown, so they will go exactly where you throw them and hit the enemies you want. Take advantage of that. Tangles are very strong and very effective for that. And you can also just shoot them if you don't want to throw them, and it'll still do the suspending blast. For our second aspect, we take Mindspun Invocation, which lets us eat our grenade to get a benefit. And in this case, with Shackle Grenade, which has a 50% flat gain factor, you will get Suspending Blasts on all kills. And that is one of the ways we are spreading a lot of suspension throughout. So with this, we need a really strong weapon to keep that going, and that's where Barrow Dyad comes in, because it's very strong, it's very effective, and it's good against small enemies and a little bit harder targets. And it's also a strand weapon. For your other abilities, you take Needle Storm by default as your super, but it's very solid. For the melee, Arcane Needle is the only thing that works with Mataiodoxia, and our only option is an 80% flat gain factor. And then I really recommend Healing Rift for healing, because there's not a lot of healing in the strand kit, and you're going to rely on that every time your health starts getting a little bit low. On Fragments, we will have 4 fragment slots, as with most Warlock builds. So we're going to take Thread of Generation, which will generate grenade energy as we deal any kind of damage. We're going to take Thread of Warding for Woven Mail, which is 45% damage reduction, but it's only for 5 seconds on Orb of Power pickup, so we need to make as many orbs as possible. On that note, we are going to take Thread of Wisdom, which will generate an Orb of Power when we kill suspended enemies with a 10-second cooldown. That 10-second cooldown is painful, but this is really helpful just to get a few extra orbs, just be looking out for those on the field. Then we're going to take Thread of Evolution just to make all those Threadlings we make a little bit stronger and get a little bit more damage in the build. Now, some other things you might want to think about: Thread of Continuity will make your Suspend and Unravel and Sever last 50% longer, and that can be really helpful. If you don't like focusing on Threadlings quite as much, or you don't care as much about their damage, Continuity is a really good pick. Now, on the flip side, if you want a little bit more Threadlings in your build, Thread of Rebirth will generate Threadlings every few kills. It's generally about every 3 common enemy kills you will generate a Threadling. All these are good options. Mix and match how you feel, but those are the fragments I recommend you look at. Moving over to our mods and armor stats, we are going to build for orbs and super. We want to heal on orbs with recuperation, and then we want to build for as much ability energy as we can. So on the orbs and super side, we take hands-on and ashes to assets on the helmet. And then for orbs, we are taking Harmonic Siphon, Firepower, Heavy-Handed, and Reaper. We have all the main orb methods. For our ability energy, we are focusing on the legs, so we're going to take Innervation and Invigoration so that we get both grenade and melee energy every time we pick up an orb. And then we're also taking Impact Induction on the gauntlets, so every time we get one of those melee hits, it's going to give us a little bit of grenade energy. That grenade cooldown is pretty brutal, and the flat gain factor is the lowest it can get, so we just really want to make sure we're synergizing that. Lastly, on the class item, we have Bomber and Outreach so that we can get a little bit more ability energy back every time we cast our Rift. On the stat side, max out Resilience, max out Discipline, and then just try and get as much strength and recovery as you can manage, but there's a lot of fragment stat penalties in this build, so you won't be able to get those too much higher. On our artifact mods, these are just the ones that I absolutely recommend you have, but you can take other ones as needed. In column 2, you want to Unraveling Orbs, because this gives you unraveling rounds for 14 seconds every time you collect an orb of power or throw a tangle. And if you boost this with the boost unlocked in Act 2, you can deal 5% increased damage to Strand debuffed enemies, which is all enemies pretty much. In column 3, you want Elemental Siphon, because this will give you just one extra way to make tangles, but it is still on the cooldown. But the bigger part is when you boost this as well. Every time you pick up a tangle, you will get 3% super energy, which is just really helpful. In column 4, our most important perk is Horde Shuttle, which will generate Threadlings when we deal weapon damage to unraveled enemies. But when boosted, those Threadlings will also sever enemies. And because of our other column 3 perk, which I forgot to mention, which is Disruptor Spike, Sever will decrease their damage by 52%. In column 5, we have 2 artifact perks focused on our super. The first is Elemental Supercharger. So when we kill those severed enemies with Strand weapons, we'll get additional super energy. And then at the very bottom, another Act 2 perk is Limit Break, which when we are at critical health or have an element matching buff, which is Woven Mail in this case, you get 30% increased super ability damage, which is just huge. So we have 2 ways of getting extra super energy in the artifact, and we can deal 30% more damage. Just make sure you pick up an orb to get that Woven Mail and then cast it within 5 seconds. Now, just to demonstrate this, I just wanted to show off some gameplay from the Lake of Shadows Nightfall. This is a really good contender for a build like this because there's a lot of tight areas that are close and just really conducive to all this AoE damage. We got a champion here, we stun him, and then we just put some Unravel on him and just build up that panic response. Don't even need it on him thanks to our teammates, but we can save that for the next group. So he just shreds these phalanxes. This is a standard difficulty, not doing this on GM, I'm just playing with randoms, but just testing everything. You can see that tangle there with the Suspending Blast just took out all these enemies and just made them easy to shoot. That is the real strength of this build. When you're dealing with common enemies and major enemies, it's just constant suspension. And it really helps with all the different kinds of champions. Champions are suspended less time, so keep that in mind, but really strong. Unraveling rounds also count as a barrier counter. We have a lot of ways to counter barriers though. Now, this next section is in this kind of tight area here, and once again, we are just shredding through it. If you know this Nightfall really well, I skipped over the part that's outside because it's just kind of a messy area, and because of all the giant Cabal air vehicles, it just slows it down a lot, and it's not very interesting to watch. Again, suspending tangles and then just getting that panic response on the enemies. You just generally want to build this up to about 3 or 4 stacks and then reload and then just unload on enemies. It does not take a lot of those Blighted Seekers to kill most enemies. You can see here just Threadlings kind of popping out everywhere. Definitely keep an eye out for those tangles. They're very valuable. I believe Bungie said at some point recently that we should be getting more Strand artifact perks, so this will just be even stronger in Act 3. You can see the Tormentor spawned here. Just kind of shredding him down with Barrow Dyad. Just kind of showing off that this does pretty well on beefier targets. Tormentors are a very annoying enemy, but even with all that, still doing good damage. And there you go. We're just going to clean up this last group here. Another team, everything gets suspended. And finishing off this guy. So, just to summarize that gameplay loop, as soon as the fight starts, consume your Shackle Grenade and get Weaver's Trance for 25 seconds. Then your objective is to try and get that grenade back before it expires. Early on, I like to throw 1 Arcane Needle into the crowd. That just makes sure I'm not capped out on charges for that, and it gives you a lot of range to proc Suspend, and because of Weaver's Trance, you'll get a double suspending explosion. And then once everything started and kicked off, I start unloading Barrow Dyad. Shoot on a single target, maybe one of the suspended enemies to build up your blight, reload, shoot the Blighted Seekers to priority targets or crowds, and it'll just shred them. Pick up those orbs whenever possible. You really need to do that in this build because they are your healing and your damage resistance, and just absolutely vital. Use your Healing Rift if your health starts getting low. Woven Mail should give you some pretty good margin to play with that health bar, but as soon as you start seeing your health near the red region, you should pop that Healing Rift and just kind of pause what you're doing. And then lastly, your Needle Storm is for priority targets or large groups. It's a very versatile super, so take advantage of it. For that, that's pretty much all I've got. Just sitting on that build review while I conclude. Hope you enjoy the build. I expect to have one more Strand focused build this week, and that will be for Titan. After that, it really just depends on what we're seeing in Act 3. Hopefully we get a preview of Act 3 artifact perks this week in the TWID, and so we can see what to build with. And then beyond there, there's still just tons of build options. I have a proposed build list that's, I think, like 15 builds deep. New stasis armor ornaments have inspired me to maybe do some stasis builds, just because stasis is always really fun and it still is really strong even with 0 artifact support. So maybe I'll do that. But if there's anything you want to see, let me know in the comments. Feel free to reach out. You can also join my Discord. It will be in the description, and you can just talk about builds or say what you want. With that, that's all I've got for today. Hope you enjoyed the build, and I'll see you in the next one.